My name is Debbie Gruey with the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Our featured speakers today are Kyle Dickinson, SANS instructor, author, and analyst, and David Aiken, AWS Marketplace Solutions Architect. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the question located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Kyle.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Dickinson, as Debbie had mentioned, and I want to thank you for joining me and David for this webcast talking about what a CASB is and how we can use it to secure our environment. I'm very excited to talk about this because one thing it involves is the cloud, which I absolutely love, and security. So let's go ahead and what is our day going to look like, at least for the next 45 minutes? Well, we're going to talk about what is a CASB, the different deployment methods we have. We'll talk about features and use cases and how we can address common use cases that I hear on a regular basis. And then David's going to go ahead and talk about relevant AWS services that augment a CASB, as well as some customer successes with solutions within the AWS Marketplace. So a CASB is what? A cloud access security broker. For the sake of sanity, we're just going to call it a CASB for the next 45 minutes because that is a mouthful to say. But a CASB allows us to integrate a solution to our cloud applications as well as our infrastructure as a service footprint like AWS, so we can provide visibility, auditing, data security, and compliance. So these are the common themes within a CASB solution that we will see, and we want to understand what can it do for us and what we can do to achieve a better state of security when we move to modern technologies. So the first consideration I always look at is the different deployment methods with a CASB. Now we can integrate a CASB to our environment multiple ways. Some are easier than others, and it depends on the existing technologies we have within our environment. So how we integrate it will also depend on what type of features we have available to us. And most CASB providers will document the different deployment models and what features are available or not available based on the deployment type that you have. So the first deployment type that we have is the API method. This is keeping your CASB up in the cloud, so to speak. And using this method is very easy to adopt because it integrates with our cloud applications and our infrastructure as a service via the API. Now, the limitations to this could be what the APIs our vendors extend us to. However, the benefit is that there's no agents that we have to deploy to any of our endpoints or workstations. So this is great if you want to just provide a better level of security without having to have folks use a secondary proxy or reverse proxy, which we'll get to in just a moment. However, this is great phase zero adoption, so to speak. This is a great way to just return value on integrating a CASB as soon as possible and with ease. And then the second method is using it as a forward proxy. Now, forward proxies act in line or very similar to what we use when we use a web proxy. The thing is, we have to use a pack file, so proxy auto configuration file, so we can do some proxy chaining. Now, this works great if we have some sort of endpoint management solution or way to push the configuration out to all of our workstations or endpoints. So we could put the CASB in line to analyze the traffic going to and from our cloud applications and our infrastructure as a service providers. Now, this may take some planning because you certainly do have to push configurations out. However, a lot of the documented CASBs out there, they'll show you that this is allowing you to be more feature-rich and leverage most of the capabilities they offer. And then the other option is a reverse proxy. So this is going to be common if you have, a bring your own device type environment, or maybe unmanaged devices. With bring your own device becoming more and more popular, your organization may find that a reverse proxy deployment is appropriate. So how does this work? Well, our users will access a cloud application. The cloud application will forward us to our CASB, and the CASB will broker authentication to our identity provider. Once the CASB brokered that authentication, it almost puts itself in line to broker the communications between us and our service providers. Now, again, this is a great option for those that have bring your own device or unmanaged devices within your environment. And I know the terminology unmanaged might be scary. However, we are getting to the point where we are bringing our own devices and we're going to be using identity as a perimeter. And so what about the types of functionalities that a CASB gives us? Well, with literally hundreds of cloud applications, how do we know what's being used? How do we know that our data is only going to authorized storage services? Or how do we know that our cloud applications are being secured in the manner that we anticipated them to be? Now, with tons of applications being used by organizations, providing a comprehensive view to our security teams and our operation teams, it's going to be very important to be more efficient when it comes to understanding day-to-day operations of what users are doing, as well as enhancing incident response. Now, user activity is a big thing, and I also hear this quite a bit on how can we determine if someone's credentials were compromised, or how can we understand abnormal activity? Well, a CASB will provide some sort of user behavior analytics, and you've heard UEBA or UBA before. Now, something to keep in mind and plan for your deployment, user behavior analytics isn't something that we're going to be able to turn on right away and then start receiving action. The CASB has to understand what is normal for our environment before we can start creating action for it. Otherwise, we might increase the number of false positives. However, this could help us understand later on, is it normal for Mark the intern to constantly stand up, say, EC2 instances that might be abnormal for what we use for our development and our applications? Or is it common for Mark to log in from multiple cities at the same time? We could argue, no, it's not. And that could be an indication of some sort of credential compromise. And we could use that type of alert and context to spark an incident response. And then data security. Something I hear over and over is, where's our data? Said most every CISO from every company from the beginning of time. And so CASBs allow us to understand where our data is being transferred to and apply some sort of DLP protections, such as either block the transfer of data that's tagged as sensitive, or maybe even intellectual property or patient records, integrate itself to provide some sort of malware detection, and also more context of data flow, such as, is our data going to unauthorized applications in the internet? Another beautiful thing about CASBs is they're able to look at our infrastructure as a service footprint and do an inventory of our configurations to see, are there any configurations that could be detrimental to our workload, or maybe map to a best practice such as the CIS benchmarks? Does this security group allow unrestricted access from the internet to SSH or RDP? Because let's be honest, we don't need RDP on the internet. That's very risky, and we want to be able to gain insight to that. We could also see who's creating these changes so we can understand the pattern of creation. So if we see someone constantly introducing risk to our environment, we could then understand why they are. Is it they don't understand the implications, or is it an automation of some sort? IAM auditing is one of those big points when we move to the cloud that is something that we should plan to do well, because this is how we are going to be gaining access and authorization to our environments. Now, CASBs can check for unused permissions, or maybe even stale users as well. There was a report that came out that showed of 100 users that were evaluated, about 7% of them were inactive, and a couple of them were administrators. So this will help us wean out stale users and also accomplish a better user lifecycle management practice. This will also help us achieve least privilege access as well, because from time to time, we may have permission creep in our environment, and we need a tool to help us prune back those privileges. So different types of use cases we have. So sensitive data being placed into an S3 bucket that is public. We don't want to have our sensitive data being placed into a public repository. And so how can a CASB help us with that? Well, it could look to see, is the destination of the data a public source? Is the data that's being transferred tagged as sensitive? And then it could block that transfer. Is it not being sent encrypted? If it's not, block the transfer. We could also make sure that data is only being stored in storage that we own. And this is a big thing, especially with how big the internet is, right? And then another big one is access keys not being shared by others. We shouldn't be sharing passwords, and we shouldn't be sharing access keys. And through the user activity, we can determine based on the IP addresses or the user agents or the version of the CLI, we could also help create this correlation of context and understand, did someone share their access key? Or did someone have their access key unfortunately stolen from them? And then we want to make sure that the only cloud applications that are being leveraged are ones that we have authorized within our organization. So I'll leave you with some considerations before I let David speak to y'all. So examine what type of deployment our organization can leverage. And this is going to be based on how we can integrate our CASB, what kind of existing capabilities do we have to support this deployment. Do we have some sort of endpoint management where we can introduce the CASB as a inline proxy? Or do we find it more appropriate to do a reverse proxy methodology because we have a huge bring your own device environment? Or do we just want our CASB to scan our cloud applications and infrastructure as a service just so we gain some essential insight, and we don't need any additional insight to that? Other things to look at is, how can a CASB integrate? Can it integrate to your DLP solutions that are agent-based, or can it be leveraged on a mobile phone? Because I've seen a lot of folks when I travel everywhere using their phones or tablets to do work. So extending this capability to mobile, we'll call them road warriors, will allow us to achieve better insights to security for those that are constantly traveling as well, or remote workers. And with that, I'll leave it with David. Thank you everyone very much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. So as Kyle mentioned, what I'm going to cover is some of the AWS services that help integrate or enhance a CASB to help secure your AWS environment. So here's our list of AWS services that are related to security. If you've been on any of these webinars previously, you'll recognize the slide we kind of map these against the NIST framework to help you position them. But there's a couple of services that I want to call out that either integrate or enhance a CASB. And these are IAM, which Kyle mentioned already. And that's going to provide your users, your groups, your roles, permissions, and all that fun stuff. And I think Kyle mentioned that it's important to understand that service. You, as a security team, should absolutely ramp up on the capabilities there. But also, it's one of the key places where you can, with a little bit of extra effort or some tooling, you can help restrict access to your environment. It goes without saying that the example Kyle just mentioned with unused security accounts, you can actually get information on unused access keys that haven't been changed for a period of time, so you can really get a feel for your access to your environment there. But the two services I really want to talk about today are Security Hub, which gives you this central view to manage security alerts and automate compliance checks, as well as
Sorry, I don't know that one.
That was Alexa, by the way, as well as Amazon Detective, which is a new service that we announced just like last week at reInvent for those of you attending live. And that's a great service that helps you investigate and quickly get to the root cause of a finding. And we'll dig into both of those over the next 10 minutes or so. So starting with Security Hub, talking with customers over the last few years who are building and deploying workloads on AWS and talking to the security teams, there was four things that stood out that led us to build Security Hub. The first one was compliance backlog. Whatever, even outside of AWS and just in a regular kind of on-premises data center, there's the feeling that the security team is kind of trying to play catch up to the IT teams, right? So there was, moving to the cloud allows teams to go faster. So the compliance backlog just gets a little bit more intense, shall we say. The other challenge customers had was around the different security log formats. So if you look across your suite of security tools, what we were finding was it was kind of hard to make these tools work together and actually come up with some of the automation and some of the investigation steps when you're dealing with different log formats is pretty difficult. And we found quite a few ETL experts hidden in security teams because of this. Too many alerts. Sometimes you're deploying tools and now it's the fire hose of alerts that are coming through to you. And finally was just having some consolidated view across your environment that would help you kind of get a sense for what the priorities are, right? It's always, I think, about figuring out like what's the next thing we're going to tackle and be proactive about, as well as dealing with the incidences that come along. So with Security Hub, it's going to give you this comprehensive view, and we have a thing in Security Hub called a finding, which is essentially like, hey, we found something, right? There's actually a finding format that we've defined, and all of the tools that integrate with Security Hub, whether they're AWS tools like GuardDuty or Macie or Inspector, all the third-party tools like Demisto, PagerDuty, Splunk, ServiceNow, take your pick across those. They're all going to use this same security finding format, which is going to make it much easier to actually not only act upon the incidents, but also provide some automation around that, right? If you think about automation, it works really well when you understand the schema, and when you're dealing with 3 or 4 different security products with different schemas, it just adds a level of friction there. So AWS, again, trying to remove this heavy lifting for you and coming up with a single security finding format for that. Now, if you're looking at the diagram there, you can see there's a couple of things that are important here. First of all, we do integrate with quite a number of partner products and services for Security Hub. So it's not just about AWS data, it's also about your endpoint protection, your compliance tools, as well as your CASB tools. And MVision Cloud is the example we're using here by McAfee. And both Security Hub and MVision can be deployed into your environment with just a couple of clicks. Once you get to the right screen, I guess, and turn that on and start actually collecting data and getting insights across your account there. So MVision Cloud actually integrates with Security Hub with its CASB data to provide AWS with those insights about what's going on within that environment. Remember, Security Hub's giving you this dashboard that's going to surface what we call a finding to give you insights into what's going on in your environment. So MVision's going to plug into that. It's going to use the Amazon findings format when sending data to Security Hub, and this is going to help with that single kind of view there. Now, some of the cool things you can do with Security Hub is you've got all this data coming in a standard format. You can actually build some automation using things like CloudWatch and Lambda to maybe, or even other third-party tools to actually fire off either further tasks or maybe some remediation. So, if you find like, Mark the intern's logging in from not the US where Mark is based, then you maybe the remediation there might be just to lock Mark's accounts until someone goes and investigates it, or maybe you're just cutting a ticket into your ticketing system. So the possibilities are endless there. Now, while Security Hub's all about kind of consolidating this view, our new service kind of takes that a step further. So let's say Security Hub is flagged some sort of issue that you need to go look at and you need to go fix it. Quite often you need to go collect more data and get some more context around what that finding actually is. And this is where Detective comes in. So, if you're trying to figure out the root cause, as I mentioned earlier, you might be trying to pull in logs from different places using ETL tools, custom scripting to organize the data, and then some security analyst has to kind of sit down and figure out like, hey, which of these 19 different data sources are actually relevant for this particular finding. So what Detective's going to do is it's going to reduce the friction, if you like, for you to analyze, investigate, and identify the root causes. And it does this by collecting, again, log data from your AWS resources. It uses a combination of machine learning, statistical analysis, graph theory to build out a set of data that enables you to basically just do things faster and have all the context around your security investigation there. And again, MVision Cloud actually works with Amazon Detective in a couple of key ways. So again, partner integration is super important in this kind of environment, right? It's not just a set of AWS tools, it's AWS and security partners as well. Now, what MVision can do is detect configuration issues or other cloud risks and actually fire them and move them seamlessly into the investigation phase with Detective. It can also function as a CSPM or a configuration security posture management tool for diverse workloads. Incidents can be detected for a number of different workloads from EC2 or container-based workloads, storage services, and that kind of thing. It's got rich incident data, multifaceted data that provides an integrated CASB-derived functionality. So Kyle mentioned DLP, endpoint malware detection, and that kind of thing. User behavior is a key one there, and as well as threat analytics, all feeding into Detective there. As I mentioned, Detective was something we announced at reInvent. It's in a preview that you can sign up for now, but if you're watching this, I guess, a little bit later in the year, it may well be fully available, but do check that out. So how are customers leveraging some of our partner tools? So McAfee here has a bunch of tools and capabilities that our customers are using to kind of build upon what we've been talking about there. So beyond reporting findings to Security Hub and Detective, McAfee is used to prevent data exfiltration, audit identity misconfigurations against benchmarks, accelerate incident response. Now, they're using MVision, for visibility into critical or sensitive data stored in S3, right? One of the things it can do is make sure that you've got the proper controls and security in place to prevent data loss on that. McAfee can basically identify and classify sensitive information and then enforce controls to either remove the data from that particular location or prevent data exfiltration by, implementing some sort of control around that. Customers can also use identity configuration issues to prevent things like DevSecOps, workload container, and other service configurations before they cause serious issues. So McAfee is going to be able to audit security configuration of the cloud against best practices and suggest modifications to improve your security posture. Now, one of the cool things you're kind of getting here is the ability to use the best practices that someone else has kind of sat and figured out and kind of play them against your environment and start getting some data back on what you should be doing, right? And again, it's a prioritization exercise, but quite often, as the security practitioner, you're like, oh my gosh, there's this huge AWS footprint, where do I start? And the tools we've been talking about with Security Hub and McAfee really help you kind of do that. We're also looking for insider threats, compromised accounts or resources, unusual activities such as superhuman travel. I love that description. Unusual downloads maybe, and it does that by using a combination of user and entity behavior analysis, analytics, and threat identification. Again, machine learning used a lot and to build up behavioral models that can detect things that are out of the ordinary here, right? So it's not just static rules. We're looking at the typical behavior of users and data and accounts and trying to figure out, where the threats are happening and what's out of the ordinary. So we want to talk about some customers that are actually implementing this with some success. AstraZeneca is a great example of this. If you don't know, AstraZeneca is a global pharmaceutical company based in the UK, and they've got an immense amount of data to protect, obviously in the pharmaceutical space. Gosh, tongue-tied today. They've got thousands of users to connect. They're partnering with other universities and other pharmaceutical companies with tens of thousands of salespeople who need access to the data from basically anywhere in the world. Now, some of the feedback from users was pretty kind of damning on the VPN access, right? Why do we have to go VPN in? It's very cumbersome to get my work done if we've got a VPN in to access something like Box, right, which is a SaaS service for storing and sharing data. But from a security perspective, we want to make sure that they're able to safely and securely collaborate across multiple devices. It could be bring your own devices, mobile devices certainly. AstraZeneca wanted a central control point to be able to kind of get a view of what's going on, but also very importantly to report on cloud usage to the audit committee and the executives, right? So typical questions from the executive is what are we using the cloud for? Where's our data going? Who has access to it? So AstraZeneca implemented MVISION Cloud and actually used it in combination with their Zscaler, which was as an inline proxy that they were basically feeding all of their web traffic through. And together they were able to process the logs to give them complete visibility in who was accessing what, despite not actually being necessarily logged into the VPNs and such. So McAfee eliminated the friction, increased data accessibility by offering a secure cloud access for about 20,000 employees globally. They were able to keep and ensure compliance within the various industry regulations that they have to meet, as well as internal policies, through their enforcement of multiple DLP policies against the box service. This enabled improved collaboration, basically reducing friction from the end users in having to kind of manage a VPN connection and make sure things were configured the right way, but also reducing the cost by consolidating into box for file sharing collaboration, right? I find a lot of the time we're improving the confidence of using some of these services when we can get the right visibility on there. AstraZeneca also reduced overall risk posture by implementing a comprehensive set of cloud governance policies using the tool, and we're able to report back to the audit committees and the executives with the right information to keep those people, ensure they're getting sleep and stuff like that. Another great example from a customer is Aether Energy Designs. Now, as a motorcyclist, I think this is a fascinating kind of idea. They actually manufacture and market smart electric scooters and charging infrastructure in the Indian scooter market, right? So you've got thousands of people in India using petrol scooters, and great kind of environmental push to reduce emissions is to move into e-scooters. So great concept here, but obviously building out this network of scooters and charging stations, they're using a lot of cloud-based connectivity here. The scooters are sending back a couple of hundred megs of data each day on usage, and again, security is super important in an environment where you're dealing with consumers, even more so in today's kind of environment. So they wanted to have a single view into their environment so they could resolve issues, gain insights, and address all the problems, right? Now, they brought in Netskope to provide that central control point and help enforce the security and compliance across both their SaaS and IaaS environments. And one of the key things here is they needed this continuous visibility into risks across their multi-cloud infrastructure environment. So yeah, they were using AWS, but also maybe other players in there, and they needed this consolidated view across that. So one of the realized benefits of using Netskope was the capability to discover and stop sensitive data from being exposed. Another outcome was the development of a continuous security assessment, and this helped them provide this single pane of view of the cloud environment at all times. Netskope's also given Aether Energy enhanced productivity through the ability to train their security teams on a single set of tools to manage their entire cloud environment effectively. And I think this is a great story, and you could say like, well, David, they're not using Security Hub and things like that. They're getting some of the same benefits, but across multiple clouds. They're reducing the burden on the security teams using partner products, and I think that's super important to kind of get across there. Now, interestingly enough, Netskope and CrowdStrike, who you might be familiar with as an endpoint protection service, have a partnership which is pretty interesting from a partner standpoint. So as more and more companies move to cloud and things, bad actors are looking at ways to get into those environments through the vulnerable parts of IT infrastructure. And it could be you bring your own device. It could be perhaps a SaaS application that hasn't really been configured correctly from a security standpoint. It could be a misconfigured IaaS instance. Maybe someone's dropped their keys into the application and they're not using instance profiles as an example. So Netskope and CrowdStrike have joined forces to enhance and complement each other's capabilities. Now, there's three ways in which Netskope and CrowdStrike work together to help with reducing the cloud threat detection, forensic analysis, and prevention. First of all, there's an exchange of threat intelligence. Netskope surfaces new threats discovered within cloud services and from websites visited by endpoints. CrowdStrike then provides Netskope with details of the endpoints which may already be compromised by that particular threat. The second is endpoint protection. Netskope can pass things like malicious file hashes to CrowdStrike, so it can alert on the affected endpoints and maybe prevent the malicious file from executing if that's the case there. And finally, the collaboration provides for an adaptive access control. So Netskope can evaluate if the CrowdStrike agent processes are running on the end user's workstation, whether that's Windows or Mac OS, and apply adaptive access based upon the results of that. So if they're running the agent, they go to get access to things. If they're not, they maybe get a reduced set of access to that. So it's a pretty good partnership and worth checking out there. Another example is with Northwestern University, who are a research institution, and they needed a solution that could scale with the university's needs while protecting hundreds of terabytes of institutional data. Now, Northwestern also is a home to a large medical school, which means they also need to comply with HIPAA regulations. So after huge amount of testing, Northwestern chose Bitglass for its real-time protection, visibility, threat protection, and identity capabilities. There was a number of benefits that they gained by leveraging Bitglass. First off, their kind of zero-day core make sure that they have protection on any application and on any device. And basically anywhere as well. Sounds like a marketing kind of line there. I apologize for that, but part of that gives them comprehensive DLP capabilities, both for data at rest and data in transit. They have user behavior analytics. That use case of Matt the interns now accessing from some pick your favorite naughty country, but one of the key things here, and one of the challenges that I think for some of the tools is, how do I get my agent rolled out across my fleet, right? Particularly when we've got mobile workers and that kind of thing. And one of the cool things about Bitglass is they have an agentless approach. So Northwestern have about 50,000 users. They didn't have to kind of figure out how to roll that agent out and keep it up to date and handle all of the help desk calls because it's been misconfigured or doesn't have connectivity. So great kind of little solution there for Northwestern. So you're probably wondering, we've talked about CASB and then we're talking about Marketplace. So you've seen how not only AWS services, but also partner solutions can help you kind of improve your security posture on AWS. And I do encourage you to go check out some of the reInvent sessions on these topics as well. And they should be on YouTube by the time you're kind of on here. But Marketplace really was built to help reduce the friction of deploying software into your environment. So if you're looking for a firewall or some endpoint protection, you're probably like, okay, maybe I'm going to use Trend Micro or Barracuda or McAfee or whoever. And you want to know how to go deploy that the right way on AWS. Well, first step is always go check, do they have a Marketplace presence? Because if they do, there's a good chance they're also providing a CloudFormation template, which will help you understand the best practices for deploying their solution within AWS. Of course, a lot of these solutions like MVISION are SaaS-based, so you can also purchase SaaS-based software through AWS, and one of the great things about doing that, any type of purchase, is that's going to appear on your AWS bill, which means in some cases, in terms of AMIs and that you deploy, you're going to be able to take advantage of tagging and that kind of thing. Now, the other cool thing we've managed to do is enable software to be built in a more cloud kind of way. And this is particularly relevant for software that you would typically deploy into your environment. We call them these AMI-based products. But if you think about a typical firewall or a typical appliance, you're probably buying a license for a year or a couple of years. And if you're working in an elastic environment where you've got to scale up and scale down based on demand, then you want to be able to kind of have flexibility in terms of not only the EC2 and the AWS infrastructure charges, but also the software charges as well. So one of the cool things we've done, and I think this is pretty neat, is we actually have software that you pay for by the hour. So if you've got a load balancer that's an auto scaling group that's scaling up your workload when there's demand and dropping it down, you can actually, any kind of third-party software that you're using there, you can actually not have to buy licenses for your peak, but use them as they come along. So maybe you're buying 2 licenses, and we've got the option of buying annual licenses. So maybe you've bought 2 annual licenses, but then when you scale up, you're just going to pay hourly for the software. You can kind of read between the lines and go, well, maybe, for an annual license, I'm going to get a bit of a discount, but, overall, you're going to save a lot of money there. Because we've kind of helped the vendors package up their applications in a way where you can deploy it pretty quickly. It's going to reduce the friction, not only for deploying into production, but also when you're evaluating some of these tools. You can actually go in and launch things pretty quickly from Marketplace and get going there. And the last thing, and this is by far the best, I think, is we actually have a team of solutions architects that directly support Marketplace and the products within there. And, they're not going to be level 500 deep on any one vendor, but they're going to be able to help you kind of figure out the right way to deploy these things, connect you up with the right technical resources, and ask kind of help you ask the right questions and that kind of thing. And then, of course, is your typical AWS solutions architect that can help with that. So how do you get started on this? Well, first of all, we talked about a few solutions here, both with some architectural diagram examples as well as some case studies here. And there's a couple more on the slide there. We have a few hundred security vendors within AWS Marketplace. And one of the cool things you can do is go take a look at what we have there. But also a lot of these have free trials. A lot of these have kind of cheap kind of introductory tier versions of the software, as well as things like bring your own license. So let me talk about that a little bit, because it sometimes catches people out. Quite often you're migrating into AWS and you want to take some of your existing tools with you, right? There's no real, you don't have to throw out everything and start again. So let's say you're using Splunk as an example already. You could move Splunk into AWS and actually use the existing license that you have there. That's the BYOL kind of thing there. We also have seller private offers, and this is kind of a little bit kind of tricky to explain, but let's say you are going down the McAfee path and MVision's the thing you're going to implement here. You may well be working McAfee or even with a consulting partner on that implementation, right? And you might look at the Marketplace kind of listing and see the street price, if you like, and say, well, I'm doing a big investment here. I want some sort of discount for commitment and that kind of thing. So we have the ability to run those unique transactions through Marketplace as well. So you can get all the benefits of, having the transactions appear on your AWS bill, having the tagging in place and being able to define billing alerts and that kind of thing. On there as well. And this applies not only to things you're working directly with the partners on, but also to the channel folks as well. If you're working with a consultant partner like Optiv, they can also transact through Marketplace as well. And then finally, we have different deployment methods depending upon the type of vendor that you're working with. So a lot of the vendors we've talked about have been SaaS. So there's not really anything to do in your environment. You're going to sign up to the service, and then you're going to have to configure the service to get access to your AWS account. And this is where IAM comes in, because what you're going to do there is, something like MVision needs access to your AWS environment so it can do its thing. What you'll do is you'll create an IAM role with the right permissions assigned to it and give that to the MVision SaaS service. And basically that's how these tools can access your environment. It's always good to review the policies that they want to create there, and make sure you're auditing that kind of access as well there. We do have CloudFormation template support, so in the case of solutions that are deployed actually into your environment, what you're going to be able to do here is get the kind of best practices wrapped up in a CloudFormation template. So if you're deploying across multiple AZs, using S3 and RDS databases as part of the solution, rather than you figuring out through reading the guides and watching some YouTube videos or whatever, you can actually just go to Marketplace, look at the CloudFormation template that the vendors actually supplied, and quite often these are built in conjunction with AWS solutions architects as well, and actually deploy the best practices straight from Marketplace. And this is just such a time saver when you're doing any kind of evaluation, but also, and I say any type of evaluation because I think in production you're usually going to tweak that, but it gives you a great starting point for that. And then finally, we have also container support. So a lot of you, I know, are migrating into container services and still want to use Splunk or wherever, and we have container versions of many of these security tools as well as tools that kind of exist outside of the container ecosystem that actually work security in the container environment, if you like. So let me summarize a little bit. So Kyle talked about CASB. It's certainly something that we're seeing growing popularity as access to our data environment is not within the physical walls of our business. So the more and more we have customers using cloud applications and IaaS is increasing, the more people are looking to CASB solutions. So being able to integrate these security solutions into your cloud platform is becoming more necessary for organizations that are using cloud technologies, or as well as SaaS services. I mean, we mentioned Box a few times as part of one of the customer examples there with AstraZeneca. So you should absolutely be looking at adopting a CASB to augment the security of your AWS environment. I think that's kind of the bottom line there. Now there's a whole wealth of tools available from AWS. So we talked about Security Hub being that consolidated view, bringing in data from the AWS tools like GuardDuty and Macy and Inspector, as well as third-party tools as well, and giving you this kind of console view of what's going on within your environment. But not only that, Security Hub can also be the source of an event that triggers some sort of automation, whether that's running a playbook or feeding the data into some third-party tool. And it could be as simple as just firing a message into Slack, into your security channel, but it could also be running a playbook from Demisto or something like that. Getting security that is in your environment, you might already have tools that you want to bring to AWS. You might also be looking to do some tool consolidation, right? Quite often we work in environments where we've kind of grown up not by by a combination of organic growth and acquisitions, and we've got like one of everything because this usually happens, right? And you might want to do some consolidation. So I think first of all, go check out AWS Marketplace. Take a look at the list of vendors that we have in there that have the certifications, have the APN, and the marketplace presence and the best practices on there. But there's also a good chance that the tools you're already using are already available in Marketplace, and that could save you some time in deploying and maintaining those environments as well. So, and the great thing is you can mix and match. So you might use some existing licenses, but then pay as you go on some of the future things. Marketplace is also, a great place for just trying things out. If you want to go spin up one of these tools for a few hours or a few weeks and do a quick POC and see, how it works in your environment, you can go ahead and do that and do it very quickly, and you don't even have to talk to people to do that. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I just like to play around with the tools before I get the sales calls and that kind of thing. So Marketplace is going to help you get started with that, and quite often links to quick starts and other kind of best practices and case studies and all that kind of thing. And then last but not least, if you can get hold of an AWS SA, and I know many of you will have account teams working on you, and go along to your local AWS Loft events and summits and reInvent and that kind of thing, and talk to some of the SAs about not only the AWS native services such as Security Hub and Detective, but also how the partners are integrating with those tools and kind of adding that value on there. So with that, I think we might have time for a question or two as well.
Thank you so much for that, for those great presentations, and we do have some questions ready for the Q&A. Let's see here. Okay, it seems to have gone away from my computer.
I think I can see them, Debbie. Maybe I can read the question and the answer while you're bringing that up. So one of the questions, and I get this a lot actually, but the question is, can you give guidance on how to know what the best pricing option would be for me? And there's a really quick answer, and I'm not going to give you that because I think some of the integration with AWS services actually allow you to do a really good job of figuring out the best pricing option over time. So all of the marketplace products, except from the BYOL model, which you've already bought the license, all of those services appear on the AWS bill. But backstepping from that, they all actually appear within the billing tools as well. So if you're familiar with either AWS Budgets or Cost Explorer, once you've subscribed to a marketplace product, those kind of line items appear as things you can set budgets on and alerts on. So as an example, maybe you're deploying some software and you want to say, hey, you know what, in my POC environment, I want to make sure I don't spend more than $500 on this particular product. What you can actually do is subscribe to the product in Marketplace. Then you can go into your billing console and actually create a budget alert on, and let's say we set it to 80%, to send us an alert when we're getting close to that $500 there. And the alert could be an email or some other event there. But that allows you to start putting controls around spend on third-party products as well as your AWS controls. And again, you can also go into Cost Explorer and actually get reports on your marketplace spend as well. So, one of the great things is take a look at those reports, build a loop where you're looking at the data and you're trying to figure out, like, have you kind of subscribed to too many things and you're not using them? Have you subscribed to too few and you're paying the kind of hourly rate? And just so you know, sometimes you can save 20, 30, 40% by buying an annual license. So keep an eye on kind of the spend there and the instances that are being deployed, and use the reporting tools that are available within AWS for both the Cost Explorer and the budgets as well. And that way you can start to build up a model of how you're actually using the software, right? Part of running a POC, and I've just worked with a customer who did this, and it was fantastic because at the end they said, how much is this going to cost? And we just looked at the report and then we were able to do some math. But that's kind of how you want to do it, right? It's sometimes hard to predict on an hourly basis when you're in an environment that's fairly elastic. what your final charges are going to be. And, using Cost Explorer and budgets and things, you're going to be able to kind of model that out. And I know that was a huge, long answer to a pretty short question, but we've got some great tools in AWS to kind of help with that. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, David. And my questions did come back up. We do have another one. What is the difference between a quick start and an AMI?
Okay, so Quick Start is in AWS. There's actually a team in AWS that build Quick Starts with partners, and the Quick Start is essentially delivered as a document, which is a guide of how you deploy the software, as well as a CloudFormation template that actually does the deployment. So, rather than just give you a CloudFormation template, we also give you the manual that goes along with it. And the idea here is exactly in the name. It's a quick start. So if you want to get Trend Micro as a good example, if you want to go get Trend Micro deployed into your environment, then you can go launch, go read through the quick start and actually launch the quick start there, and it's going to deploy it in a highly available, highly resilient way that's been built from the best practices that customers have had over the years in actually running this on AWS. So rather than you having to kind of figure it out, the quick start's going to help you just get going immediately with that. Now the question was, so that's what a quick start is. An AMI is an Amazon Machine Image. So it's the building block, if you like, for EC2. An AMI typically contains an operating system, a disk, and any software they might have installed on it. So you can spin up an AMI with just an OS on it. It could be Amazon Linux or Windows or whatever. And then typically what a marketplace seller does is they go install their software into the AMI. So they're going to install all of their prerequisites, and this is this is so valuable because half the time it's like, which version of this library do you really need on the here? So they already figure all that out. They install their software. They do some of the basic configuration to make it run well on AWS, and then they create what we call a snapshot of that, and that becomes we turn that into an Amazon Machine Image. So when you buy something from Marketplace, they're basically giving you giving you access to this AMI. So when you start the AMI by creating an EC2 instance from it, the software is already installed, all the prereqs are installed, and all that kind of thing. And the only thing you really have to do is run a typical OS update to make sure you get all the latest security patches and all that kind of thing on it. So how are they related? Well, a quick start typically uses AMIs to do all of the work. So a quick start might use an AMI and launch an instance across 2 regions in an auto scaling group, but it's using the AMI is kind of the blueprint, if you like, for the software there. So I think that probably covers it.
That does indeed. Thank you. And a last question. Is it better to purchase services that include the license or to leverage the BYOL model?
Jokingly, I'm going to say yes to that question, even though it wasn't a yes or no answer. But sometimes you have sometimes you have an existing license and you just want to move that into AWS and get on with your day. You can absolutely do that for the majority of AMI-based products in there. The key there is, again, looking at your usage patterns, because it may be that you want to use more instances than you have licenses for. In which case you might be using a combination of BYOL or AWS Marketplace images, which don't actually contain a license. We do some hocus pocus trickery under the hood to know when you're running an AMI that contains a third-party piece of software from Marketplace, and we actually bill you based upon the usage of that. So if you think about today, you spin up a VM maybe and you've got to get a license key or a license file into it. We remove the need for you to have to do that in a AMI purchase from Marketplace, which means you basically just start the thing and we'll take care of billing you for it on there. We're pretty good at billing people for stuff, so that works out pretty well.
Well, thank you. And that does take us to the top of the hour.